Hello and welcome to those of you joining us on Lincolnshire Reporter. My name's Stefan Pidluzny, and with me for the final in our series of live Facebook chats with the candidates standing in the Sleaford North Hykeham by-election is Marianne Overton from the Lincolnshire Independent. Welcome, Marianne.
Thank you.
And just to kick things off before we actually get into talk about the by-election, Lincolnshire Independents, are you actually... Look, so quite a few candidates which say independent, they're obviously parties as well. Where does Lincolnshire Independents actually sort of stand on that?
Lincolnshire Independents are a network of councillors and members of the public right across the county, and what we focus on is listening carefully to residents, looking at the facts, and then focusing on the best outcomes for you, the people we serve.
Okay, so it's in a way, it's like a party, but it's a bit more loose than...
Yes,
yeah.
I mean it is a party, but the important point is that we can speak and vote independently, and more importantly think independently, because we're concentrating on what's best for residents.
Sure. Yeah. So why have you decided to stand in the Sleaford North Hykeham by-election?
I think it's important that we have somebody who's local. I live right in the heart of this constituency. I have served the area reliably for 25 years now, working for people locally.
So what sort of jobs?
So I understand the issues as a district
councillor.
District councillor, county councillor, and indeed I've been elected to a national position where I represent independent councillors across England and Wales and Vice Chairman of Local Government Association. Okay. And the point about that is that we represent 20,000 councillors across the two countries, and our job is to help them upskill so that they do the best job possible. Yeah. And secondly is to lobby central government to get improvements in the laws to make life better for our residents. So this week I've been working on funding. As you know, Lincolnshire is very short funded. We need more. So I've had meetings this week on that, both with MPs and also with colleagues who are also working with their MPs to make sure that we get something for adult care in particular is the big campaign at the moment. So
and that obviously links into healthcare and the NHS as well.
Absolutely.
What have you made of the situation at Grantham A&E?
I am bitterly disappointed.
With who?
With the way it is. I sat on what was the Primary Care Trust, which was the decision-making body at the time when it was last threatened. I thought then that it should be kept open because it serves a large population there, and at that time we discussed it and we kept it. Now I see that it's A, downgraded, and B, closed overnight, and that is seriously dangerous for people, particularly because it puts added pressure on the ambulance service as well, and therefore on the other hospitals. So you've got to get an ambulance, and it's got to get you to another hospital that has space, and that's the problem.
What would you do differently to what's already been done?
They've got to have proper funding. This government is trying to do the government's trying to do public services on the cheap. They have retained more and more of our income tax. So we've been paying our income tax just the same, but they've been keeping more of it. Less of it has been coming down to local government and other public services. And
so how much should come to Lincolnshire then?
I'm not on the Primary Care Trust now, so I don't know how much is needed for
they're
47 million short at the moment, is their declared shortfall for ULHT. The County Council is 57 million short next year.
So combine that, so over 100 million.
On top of all the cuts that we've got, on top of the cuts that we've planned, on top of taking the money out of reserves, after you've done everything you can, we're still £57 million short. That's a lot of services that we will expect to lose next year if somebody doesn't get in there to Parliament and explain very clearly what it actually means to people in Lincolnshire, how it actually feels to live here. And I think the problem is they don't understand. You know, they're in their place in Westminster. I don't think they really...
Bubble, don't they?
I don't think they cotton on.
So in terms of funding, you've sort of touched on quite a bit. It's an important issue, one that you feel passionate about. What other issues have come up on the doorstep?
Roads, I think, is important.
So in terms of roads, then, what sorts of upgrades, improvements should we be looking for?
Well, even today, I went to North Hykeham and they've got a tea dance on there. It's a brilliant project. And so I had a little tea dance on my way. And the problem there with the roads is that the pavements are very poor, so you've got people whose sight maybe isn't fantastic anyway, trying to keep themselves fit and walk themselves to the tea dance, and they're at risk, serious risk of falling. And also they've got the heavy weight of traffic there, because we've got extensive build being allowed, and in fact encouraged by this government, massive house building, and yet without the matching services that go with it. And this is the crux of the problem. So we see all of our services deteriorating whilst the demand increases.
So in terms of roads then, are there any in particular that you'd like to see upgraded in the constituency?
I think it's, obviously it would be so nice if we could get the Eastern bypass dualled. You know, the suggestion of having the new bypass as a single one, it's a single track instead of dualling. We also need better roads around. North Hykeham is completely jam-packed, more or less all day now, and it's really difficult to get in and out. There is a plan there for another road, but that will need substantial funding. That's
the question, isn't it? Where does all the money for all these schemes come from?
Exactly. Well, at the moment, what we've seen is that this government is quite happy to spend £80 billion on making a rail 20 minutes quicker from London to somewhere near Birmingham.
Speaking about HS2.
HS2, you've still got it doesn't even go to Birmingham, it goes somewhere near Birmingham. And that just makes the journey quicker, and whilst at the, one flagship project, hugely expensive, while the rest of the system falls apart. Not good enough.
No. And in terms of other highways improvements, you mentioned sort of pavements improvements on that as well. The government's given Lincolnshire some money for potholes this week. Is it enough?
No, it isn't.
How much would be enough?
The shortfall, I'm trying to remember the figure, the shortfall is significant, because we have suffered over a long period of underfunding, because it seems like you can get away with it in the short term, maybe not repairing this, extending the repair, but there comes a point where everything is starting to get to the point where it's falling apart, and if you don't do the repairs at the right time, the frost and ice gets in and it falls apart much faster. So by not doing timely repairs, the overall cost is massively increased. So yeah, they need proper funding. It's a big job, and it's a consequence of having, I believe it's a consequence of having a safe seat here for a long period of time, which has allowed the government to think that Lincolnshire can be shortchanged. We have to wake them up and say we want a change. Give them a Lincolnshire Independent MP, somebody who is standing up determinedly for Lincolnshire. Let's make them sit up and take notice and come out and have a look at what it's actually like in Lincolnshire and what support we need.
What do you, as a Lincolnshire Independent, make of Brexit? How did you vote in the referendum?
The Lincolnshire Independents did not take a line. We didn't take a view. All but one, as it happens, voted for out.
How did you vote?
I voted out.
Why was that?
My main I'm a Europhile. I love Europe, and I myself, in fact, my son.
Clearly not the EU, though.
Exactly, but not the EU. I've got family connections as well. My son's actually studying currently in Utrecht.
What is it about the EU that you don't like?
The problem that I see is that our country has very limited resources. We saw hundreds of thousands of people flooding into Germany, in fact welcomed at that time, and they could have, once they're obviously citizens of the EU, they can go anywhere, and that means that they could very easily come here. And
so
I'm sympathetic, but it has to be
a big problem.
When it's excessive, it needs to be in balance with what we can manage.
Mean?
If we can manage, and as we've said with the asylum seekers that we've welcomed, we have to have the resources to support them. And we've made that case to central government, and they have given us some resources to cope. And that's what we need. If we can we want to help, but if it means that you're just on a small island sinking, you haven't helped anybody. What we need to do is to make sure that we can keep things in balance. We need to get our economy thriving. That's really the only way we're going to make some money, so that we can get things moving. And then, secondly, we need to make sure that we are in balance so that the services are provided for the people we've got.
What about people from the EU who are currently living in Lincolnshire, perhaps working in the NHS, working on the fields even?
Absolutely.
What happens to them?
Nothing. I think it's right that they will have work permits, and absolutely that is the whole point of a system. And that people, my son has actually been working abroad outside of Europe. The employer organised his work permit and they have a month to do that. And yes, it's bureaucracy, I accept,
surely the
but
EU,
it's a process
surely
that
one of the
can work.
reasons to leave the EU though was to get rid of red tape and bureaucracy, so isn't this just adding an extra bit?
Yeah, no, I accept that. You can't have it both ways.
Okay.
Yeah.
A lot was said during the referendum as well about taking back control of the laws. I assume that was probably one of the reasons as well why you wanted to vote to leave.
Yeah, yes, I've been working on 500 pieces of legislation. I'm on a committee both nationally and locally where we are looking at that for the government. We've prioritised firstly getting the money down to where it's needed. We don't want the government holding on to those European funds. We want those spent in our areas, in our streets and villages where it's been promised. We also would like to make sure some of the legislation is kept, like clean beaches, clean air. Those are important.
What are some of the EU laws that you don't like?
One of the things I think it could usefully change is the procurement. And what that means currently is that when our council or any public body wants to spend money, they give equal opportunity to anybody in Europe, any company in Europe. Now
what's wrong with that?
Well, that means that many of our services and indeed our facilities, if you take the energy from waste plants and so on, are not run by companies in this country. I found, why that's a problem, for example, the Leadenham recycling site was closed by the county council, which I objected to strongly. I've managed to get all of the bodies to agree and even funding in place, but the sticking point was the person who had the contract, the long-term contract for the site. To speak to them, they're in Spain and they don't want to speak to me. I said, why would you leave your site empty when you could be making money on it? They said, that's company policy and they're not local.
Okay, so
it's much more difficult to be, they're not as accountable, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So
and local employment, local businesses.
So procurement's an important one that you mentioned. What other EU laws don't you like?
I think we would, obviously we've talked already, we'd need to do something about the immigration levels.
Yeah, we mentioned that ones that we haven't sort of discussed.
Yeah, I think those are the important ones that we're starting with. We'll be looking at some of the others as we go on, but we have to make a start with what will make a difference both to our economy and particularly to keeping things in balance.
Okay, moving away from Europe and back to Sleaford and North Hykeham, what would be a good result for you next week?
A win.
How realistic is that?
Well, let's see. We've just had a 23,000 majority overturned from the Conservatives in Richmond.
That was kind of a Brexit vote though, wasn't it? In a way, so the Remain Liberal Democrat candidate beat Zach Goldsmith and the Conservatives and UKIP didn't stand.
The point it makes...
You obviously believe in Brexit like
the point it makes...
Conservatives.
No, I don't think that's quite fair. I don't think it's quite like anybody. Either what I've looked at as an independent is look specifically at the facts of the matter and look for the best option. Don't put me both with anybody.
But you both support leaving the European Union.
An independent, what we've looked at, the facts of the matter at the time and worked on that. If we could look at where were we, the other issues? So I think what's important is that we make sure that we get things in balance for our county. That's what we have to have. Sure. Money, resources, people in balance.
And we'll find out this time next week who will have won the by-election as well.
Well, absolutely. We just had a 23,000 majority overturned in Richmond, and I don't see why we shouldn't have that here as well. And I think it's really important that we have an independent, because then we can focus on what's best for the people that we serve here in Lincolnshire.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for joining us, Marianne. Sadly, we're out of time now. Marianne was the final candidate we have got to be interviewed. Before, we've had Ross Pepper on Wednesday from the Liberal Democrats. On Thursday, we had three. We had Caroline Johnson from the Conservatives, Victoria Ayling from UKIP, and Peter Hill from the Monster Raving Loony. And today, we've already had four more in addition to Marianne. We've had Sarah Stock, who's an independent, Jim Clark from Labour, David Bishop from the Bus Pass Elvis Party, and Paul Coyne, another independent.